I have the honour today to speak to you on behalf of the ACP London Sugar Group. I'm speaking to you from London. I'm really sorry I couldn't be with you today, but Philip and I have put together this little video presentation for you, which we hope will bring you up to date with what's going on in London, the work that we're doing. And if any questions, I suppose you'll have to email us, or maybe we could arrange a Zoom conference or something like that. But anyway, sit back and enjoy. Before I begin, may I ask our new Prime Minister to say a few words? It's the 24th of July and Boris joins us from number 10.
Good afternoon. I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, who has invited me to form a government, and I have accepted. And we're going to fulfil the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st. No ifs or buts.
There are, of course, quite a few ifs and buts. Boris's new government has a majority of just one seat, including the Democratic Unionist Party. So there's a question of if he can deliver, and it doesn't look good. There are many MPs within his own Conservative Party who vehemently oppose a no-deal Brexit, adding to which the opposition parties are almost certain to unite to try to prevent a no-deal Brexit. In furtherance of these aims of the opposition, there is expected to be a vote of no confidence after the summer recess. So there's a question of if Boris can survive. On the 18th of August, the Sunday Times splashed with reports from deep inside government warning of chaos in the event of a no-deal Brexit. On Monday, the 19th of August, the Prime Minister wrote to the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. He said that the backstop is anti-democratic and inconsistent with the sovereignty of the UK as a state. Secondly, it is inconsistent with the UK's desired final destination for a sustainable long-term relationship with the EU. Although we will remain committed to world-class environmental, product and labour standards, the laws and regulations to deliver them will potentially diverge from those of the EU. Accordingly, he went on, we cannot continue to endorse the specific commitment in paragraph 49 of the December 17 Joint Declaration to full alignment. And thirdly, the backstop actually threatens the Good Friday Agreement. So what I propose, Boris said, is that the backstop should be replaced. That evening, the Prime Minister and Taoiseach Aaron, the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, shared perspectives on the withdrawal agreement in an hour-long phone call. Boris then travelled to Berlin to meet the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The Prime Minister then travelled to Paris to meet Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, the Dex-EU Minister Steve Barclay has been in Denmark, possibly not to discuss the sale of Greenland, and also in Finland. And this weekend, the G7 leaders and many others, including Cyril Ramaphosa from South Africa, will gather in Biarritz. It remains to be seen whether or not the G7 chairman, Emmanuel Macron, will take the opportunity of the G7 meeting to convene a meeting on the margins with the EU leaders, including Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk, to see if there's any way forward. So, we're at an impasse. The EU says the only deal on the table is the withdrawal agreement. The UK have 3 times rejected the withdrawal agreement in Parliament and are saying that it must be renegotiated, in particular to remove the hated backstop. The reality is this: the Conservative Party is unlikely to win an election, unless the UK has Brexited, so they'll try and delay an election until after Brexit date, 31st of October 2019. Boris tried to be upbeat after his meetings with Angela Merkel and with Emmanuel Macron, but he had to admit that whilst the mood music had been very good during his meetings, it was still going to be very hard to persuade the EU to give way. Speaking during a visit to a hospital in Devon, he said, "This is not going to be a cinch. This is not going to be easy. We will have to work very hard to get this thing done." Boris added, "I'm afraid we will have to prepare to come out without an agreement."
We have to have an arrangement that allows the whole UK to come out of the EU and to have frictionless trade at the border in Northern Ireland. There are lots of ways we can make sure that that happens. But to persuade our EU friends and partners, who are very, very, very hard over against it, will take some time and some effort. And I'm afraid we will have to prepare to come out without an agreement.
And that means we must all prepare. We must all prepare because Brexit is an opportunity for the UK government to create real preferential access for sugar industries in ACP and LDC countries. Of course, we've done a lot of preparation already, and so has the UK government. The UK government has announced its temporary tariff schedules, which we feel were informed by the lobbying that we had undertaken previous to that publication. Of course, it was always going to be the case that LDCs would have duty-free and quota-free access, but the UK went further than that, proposed to impose, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, a duty of €150 a tonne on sugar, with duty-free access under the continuity agreements with CARIFORUM, with ESA, Eastern Southern African states, and unfortunately for us from also Central America, duty-free. There are, of course, outstanding issues with the SADC, SACU plus Mozambique configuration. Moreover, the UK government proposals are not ideal from our point of view. If we may assume that the SACU plus Mozambique continuity agreement may eventually be signed, there's no need for an additional tariff rate quota of 260,000 tonnes. There's no need because given the split of CXL quotas and the likely split of the FTAs, and also the likely, or let's say average, domestic sugar beet production in the UK market is only so big, and the ACP countries have more than enough sugar to fulfil the needs, whatever they may be. We made this point to DFID when we met them on the 26th of July, and we examined these statistics very carefully, and we felt that we got somewhere with DFID and that they were at one with us that the additional tariff rate quota need only be opened on the basis that these requirements were not being met. In other words, a mechanism of last resort, a sort of exceptional measure for the UK market. We summarised to DFID on the 29th of July that the ACP were once an integral part of the EU sugar policy, and the ACP countries signed the economic partnership agreements on that basis. They've now been abandoned to world market prices. Surplus sugar production capacity in most ACP sugar countries was developed to serve the preferential markets in the EU, and that production has now been redirected to loss-making global sugar markets. We also made the point that the subsidies, notably voluntary coupled support, given to EU beet farmers has severely distorted and damaged not only the EU sugar markets but the ACP and LDC markets, whilst globally subsidies in, for example, India have severely distorted and damaged the world markets. We finished off by saying that we look forward to the UK to enact an enlightened, pro-development sugar policy. We back up our arguments with data which we have sourced from Eurostat through our own downloading and filtering of the data to extract raw sugar for refining prices from ACP countries on a CIF free-out basis, and which we can plot and compare with the number 11 prices, which of course are FOB prices. It's clear from these data that when the market was managed with quotas, the price was very stable for us. The CIF price delivered to Europe, of course. Whereas after the quotas were abandoned in 2009, the prices became really rather volatile. And then when the domestic EU quotas were abandoned in 2017, the price tended towards the world market price. The blue line's a little bit above the red line, but bear in mind that the blue line is a CIF price and the red line is an FOB price. Of course, if you want the data in Excel format, we can do that. We can also break it down in more detail, for example, by regional trading groups, SADC, CARIFORUM, for example, or even by member state and individual ACP country. You just have to ask. Returning to the issue of WTO subsidies, and VCS in particular, we have, of course, steered clear of challenging the EU in the WTO. We did so because the EU market distortions benefited us in that it was a preferential market with real market value. That's no longer the case. We've listened to presentations made by the Australians, the Guatemalans and the Brazilians who are challenging the Indian sugar subsidies. It's clear that for them this is a big decision. Even for the European Commission, when asking for ACP countries whether or not it would support them in any sugar-related WTO issues, they've made it clear that they don't have the resources to mount multiple challenges and therefore they have to pick their fights carefully. There is still an ACP group in Geneva. Some of the Brussels-based trade councillors and ambassadors are accredited to both Geneva and Brussels, and there used to be fairly active involvement on sugar issues from the ACP Secretariat. However, in recent years this has been diminished, at least from a sugar's perspective, by the retirement of Jay Govindan and Nidan Singh. So where do we go from here? Obviously, companies cannot challenge or get involved in WTO panels unless they're supported by their governments. Our understanding is also that countries challenging have to be able to demonstrate that they've been injured by the actions of the offending party. We believe we should be encouraging our government to support challenges where we can demonstrate that we have been affected, and without doubt, the most obvious of these is the one surrounding voluntary coupled support. We hear that the Canadians have agreed in principle to lead the challenge, and that there are some ACP countries who are prepared to come along for the ride, but they don't want to be the only ones seen to be driving the process forwards. The problem we have is that attacking the EU through the WTO at a time when the ACP are trying to negotiate a successor agreement to Cotonou is and will continue to face resistance from within the ACP group. Our colleague Patrick Châtenay is going to be in Geneva at the end of next month, September, and he's planning to do some work on this to see where the process has got to, and this should be an interesting opportunity for us to gain insight. As a commercial group, there's only so much we can do, but we do think we should continue to be vocal with Brussels and London to the extent that they still have contact still with Geneva, and we should keep this item on the agenda. And we can do so by encouraging our ministers to become more involved. We also believe that a regional approach through SADC would be very useful. Let's turn to some of the Brexit preparation issues that we need to address, first of which perhaps health and phytosanitary concerns. We reckon that the UK's health and animal welfare standards are likely to remain the same, if not more stringent than those in the EU27, and we don't think there's anything that we need to worry about apart perhaps from pallets, which may be caught by EU horticultural rules, particularly if they're transiting into the EU via the UK. We need to be careful that the pallets we use are compatible with both UK and EU rules. Next up, rules of origin. There's a real danger that ACP sugar could be second class. By that I mean, if sugar is used in processed products manufactured in the UK, and there is a hard border between the UK and the EU27, then we could find that industrial users will prefer to receive British sugar rather than ACP sugar, owing to the accumulation of origin rules. This problem would, however, be alleviated under free trade agreements, providing that the free trade agreements themselves provided for the problem. There is, of course, a lot more to discuss, but I'm conscious that I'm eating into my 15 minutes of fame. I should, however, mention import procedures and documentary requirements. I'm sure that Tate and Lyle have probably filled you in about most of what's required, but I can perhaps allay your fears that essentially the EUR1 certificate that we've been used to filling in will remain the same for UK trade as it is already for EU27 trade. At the end of the day, it is for the buyer to declare their documentary requirements, and if they get it wrong, it is for the buyer's account in case of any costs and consequences. There is an awful lot more to say, but I've probably run out of time. In summary, there's a lot that we can do to prepare for Brexit, for a no-deal Brexit in particular. Firstly, we can study the government website and make sure that our documentary requirements and all the other bits and pieces like that are compliant. But perhaps more importantly, we can recognise that this Brexit issue contains many moving parts. As Michel Barnier said, we can't have our cake and eat it. For example, we may not get what we want as regards accumulation of origin, whilst at the same time maintaining a market in the UK which is preferential and in particular is more preferential than the EU market. We haven't very much time until the 31st of October 2019, but we can build on what we've achieved in the ACP London Sugar Group. Our next meeting will be the meeting of the Food and Drink Group on the 12th of September. We will continue to argue for a more balanced, development-friendly, enlightened UK sugar policy. We will focus on the details, for example, the detailed method of allocating quotas under the so-called autonomous tariff rate quota of 260,000 tonnes. These details are important because they will decide who may get the benefit of the preferential market we hope to build in the United Kingdom. Above all, though, we look to you in SADC and in the other regions to direct the ACP London Sugar Group in the way that you wish us to proceed. Thank you very much for your attention. Wish you a very successful conference.